Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I am the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Naomi Lenane, and she is a CIO, and we're going to talk about the communication issues between technical teams and non-technical leaders, why those issues often cause faltering, and what those gaps cost an organization. And we'll also dive into how misconceptions about how engineering and IT teams, how they make decisions at the highest level, and what leaders can do to build teams that communicate with clarity, confidence, and impact. So, welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Naomi.
Thank you, Neil. Happy to be here.
So, first question I have for you: as you're in your position as a CIO, where do you see these communication gaps between technical and non-technical teams come up the most?
Sure. One of the biggest challenges, I would say, and where the conversations hit, most are around budget and project initiation. So really being able to secure funding for a technical project, it falls apart if you cannot explain why the technical project you're doing helps the end user or helps the enterprise as a whole. So if you think about needing to, move from, Windows 19 servers to Windows, 22 servers or something, it can't be about, I just need to do a server upgrade. You need to be able to explain a server upgrade in context of the business. It will be better performance. There's security features, that will help, drive down the, cyber risk, or, what are the reasons that doing this infrastructure upgrade will help the business. And because when you submit something that just says it's time to do an upgrade from X to Y, like that's the first thing that gets cut because, well, can't we just extend that old server a little longer? If you can't explain it in relation to the benefit to the business, then it's going to get cut. So budget time is, and we're in the middle of budgets right now, so maybe that's why it's top of mind for me that we're planning our next fiscal years of budget. But I really do think I've seen over the years technical projects get cut because they're not explained in a way that shows the value to the business.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times what we technical people need to do is tell people what are you going to lose possibly if
Hmm.
what we're talking about doesn't get done. Because when you make it personal to people, oh, I'm going to lose X, Y, and Z. Okay, yeah, maybe this update does need to get done after all.
Right. Right. Yeah. Or it's like, what are you going to lose, or what do you gain by doing the upgrade? Like, what is it bringing to you? What are there new features? Is there enhanced performance? Performance is a huge one. I mean, I'm in healthcare technology, and if we say your computer's going to work better, faster for people, I mean, performance is always a topic that comes up all the time, and so continuing to sort of do upgrades or buy better equipment, that desktop needs to get replaced every 3 years instead of every 5 years, that's a big chunk of money. But if it means that you're going to have better performance and people can do their jobs better, faster, differently, and they'll, be better engaged, or there'll be fewer workarounds, there's ways to make that case to spend that money.
Yeah, absolutely. Based on what you've said, Naomi, I'm kind of curious now. With at least with your example of replacing the computers within 3 years as opposed to five, what kind of evidence would you need to give somebody who's perhaps non-technical to even show or prove that replacing it within five as opposed to or replacing it in 3 as opposed to 5 years will improve in their performance?
Sure. So we've done things like even done things like time studies to show that sort of a log on time. So, and if a physician has to log into a computer, 27 times a day, and upgrading the device is going to be 2 minutes faster, 27 times 2 minutes, times how many physicians we have. I mean, we have done things like specific time studies to prove that that's true time spent of our most important resource. So in healthcare, your clinical teams are your most important resource. So trying to show that like time that gets wasted for them is a waste of our resources is a way we've attached or went after getting the funding for that upgrade. Or we recently in the last handful of years put in something we call tap and go, where you log into the system once a day, but from that point forward you can use your badge to tap into a device that logs you in to a computer, and that speeds up the process of logging in. And it also is like better if you're with a patient, you're not sitting at a keyboard typing away. You just tap your badge, and the monitor can come up with the patient's record, and you're able to interact with them in a much faster but also sort of more personal way than sitting down and typing. And so being able to demonstrate either like I said, a time study or a workflow that would be a better experience for the clinician and for our patient are ways that we've sort of convinced leadership to spend money on things when budgets are always tight.
Interesting. That's really interesting. So my next question then is, what misconceptions do you think that non-technical executives have about the technical teams, and how do you think those misconceptions affect organizational decisions?
Sure. So I do think a lot of non-technical leaders assume that technical people don't understand operations. They don't understand sort of the workflow, and they are only sort of caught up in their world of, ones and zeros and bits and bobs and widgets, right? So for myself and for my team, we work really hard at not having technical conversations with non-technical people. So we work really hard at having business conversations, so workflow conversations, operational conversations, where the technology is really there designed to support your goals as an operating leader. So I think if you come to a meeting with a non-technical person thinking you should have a technical conversation, that's when things start to go downhill. You really want to have a conversation that is about their business. So it is about nursing, it is about pharmacy, it is about patient care, whatever it is, whoever they are. If we can have a conversation that's about a patient and about the patient experience and the workflow with the patient, that's a successful conversation. If we're starting to talk about, upgrade dates and server performance and desktop performance, I feel like I've lost that battle. Like I've lost the conversation because I do not want to be talking about those things with my non-technical colleagues. I want to be talking about patient growth and volume and capacity of our buildings and things that really aren't necessarily in my span of control, but I know that my software, my hardware, my teams, my resources are what's making all of that happen. And so that's what I want to talk about. I don't want to talk about my stuff. I don't want to talk about my software solutions. We should probably not be talking about the things that are in my span of control. I want to be talking about how I'm making the items in their span of control better, faster, different.
Yeah. You want to be talking about what's going to help them do their jobs better.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And help the business as a whole, right? And I work in a healthcare, so it's a hospital. And so I want to help the hospital as a whole, but you do have to think of it as a business because there are, business aspects. We have patients, but patients are also consumers, right? Patients kind of choose where they get care. And so really thinking about our patient portal as a way that a patient as a consumer interacts with us as a hospital, and how do we make that a good experience for them? Again, not worrying about maybe the software part of it or the bug fixes or whatever, but really thinking about the what's patient facing and what is that patient experience and who are the personas. So we do persona work to say, like, not all patients are the same. How do we make sure that our tools that are patient facing work for different personas of people? That kind of work is sort of not technical, but it makes sure that the technology that we're putting out there is going to be adopted. I'm probably one of the least technical CIOs out there because my focus is on adoption. There might be a super cool widget, phone, new way to do something, new technology getting released. If it's not in use at scale, like I don't care about it. I care about making sure what we're implementing gets put in place, is used, is adopted, and is adopted at scale.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. What do you think are the consequences of technical and non-technical people not communicating in a way that's useful to either of them?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's consequences on both sides, right? So in the healthcare arena, the consequences could be that, software is not being used well. And I mean, the worst consequence in healthcare is that there's patient harm, right? That something happens because the software, the user, the nurse, the physician, the clinic assistant, somebody didn't use the software the way it was intended, or missed something, or there was not an alert that should have been alerted. So in my world, the greatest consequence is patient harm, which we do everything to try and avoid, obviously. But there also can be sort of, other consequences like, wasted dollars, right? Did we buy something that then no one ever really used, or we're not using it the way it should be used, which is, we shouldn't have paid that much money for something if we weren't going to use it well. Or did it not get rolled out to everybody and now it's only in use by a certain group when really we should be spending time, rolling something out that everybody could use. Other consequences I think are with the personal relationships between people. You can create groups, or two people could sort of not enjoy working together, right? Which means that they won't work together. So if you don't like working with someone, you usually avoid it, right? So then what can happen is an operations person doesn't really enjoy working with this technical person because they are miscommunicating all the time and they don't really understand what the other person is saying. And maybe the operations person goes off and tries to like buy software on their own, or buy some hardware, or buy something on their own, not involving the technical person because they weren't communicating well. And again, that's like a waste of money or waste of energy and time and resources, that we would want to avoid. And maybe the technical person can, we've seen this, if they don't enjoy working with the operational folks, maybe they go off and code something the way they think it should be. And then of course that ends up not being the way the end user would want it, which means again a waste of people, time, resources. And I do think it ultimately gets to a place where employees kind of disengage. It becomes a place they don't want to work, right? Because they're not working with people who understand them or who are trying to understand them. I do think it's a huge concern if you have technical teams and operational folks who can't communicate. I think it can really become across the board negative for a company, where you get disengaged people, you maybe spend money you don't need to be spending. It's a real concern.
You're absolutely right. When you were talking, Naomi, it reminded me of a past guest that I had, and she said that she worked with this gentleman, and she was whenever she wanted to talk to him, she couldn't talk to him when she wanted to. And she so they sat in an area where she could see his desk, but he'd have on his desk a cube, and the cube could either be red or green. When when the cube was green, you could talk to him, but when the cube was red, you couldn't. And the problem was the cube was almost always red. So she would always have to be looking over at him to see whether
Yeah.
the cube was green or not to get her window in to be able to ask him or talk to him about anything. And so when you were talking about poor personal relationships based on the difficulties with communicating, that was the first thing that came to
Oh,
mind.
yeah, that's I'm not sure how that would work in my organization. I think that's a challenging situation for sure. And knowing that, there's some nice like self-awareness, right? Of I'm going to put this green when I'm able to like have a conversation, or maybe I feel like open to discussion and like I'm in the right mindset to have conversation. There you could say there's a positive there, except if it's not green very often, then that's a different problem. And I think there's some HR human resource challenges in that scenario, maybe not just about the two people trying to connect, but having technical people learn to be open to operations, I think is really important. And to me, I feel strongly, and it's harder now with a lot of remote work, but especially being in a hospital setting or a healthcare setting, we also do research at my organization. I feel strongly that our folks should come in, not to sit at their desk and be in Zoom meetings, but to come in and go to the hospital, walk around, see how your technology is in use, observe clinicians. Like we do have the ability to shadow clinical people for a day, go into our research labs and shadow a researcher. As a technical person, you need to see your technology in action. By the end user, you need to see a patient, being, whether it's, we don't have operating rooms, but if you had an operating room, like you would want to be able to see all of it happening so that you can understand how what you do touches the patients that we take care of. And because I think when people lose that is when they lose that ability to like keep the patient top of mind when you're doing technology. And I don't think we should do technology for technology's sake. Like we should be doing technology that has a goal and a purpose, not just because it's kind of cool, but that cool factor needs to have a purpose. And in our world, the purpose is a patient and patient care. And so keeping that patient top of mind is critical to be successful in my organization. And we recommend technologists kind of leave their homes or leave their cubes and, come and see the patients and interact with our end users and talk to nurses and doctors and, front desk staff and, even the volunteers and whoever's around to get a sense of, how they see the technology working in our organization and what works and what doesn't work, and get ideas of what to fix directly from our end users and from our patients. What's the patient's perspective of the doctors using computers and things like that. It's a way of giving a technologist a really different perspective, and we encourage that, or I encourage that in my organization. I think it's important to get out of your cube or your desk and go out there. I was actually listening to some of your previous podcasts to get a sense of what today would be like. And, you actually mentioned to one of your guests that you thought, well, we must have sold a lot of some things for me to be, for me to get paid every week, as if you weren't sure what those things were that your company built. And I was it made me laugh because I had been at a people who want to become CIOs conference, 10 years ago before I was a CIO. And I was at a table with people and we were introducing ourselves, and one of the people at the table said, I work for a biomedical device company. And I said, what devices do you make? And the person said, I don't know. And I thought, that's strange to me. Like, you should know. So as a CIO, and honestly, anyone in technology, like, you should know what your technology is doing. What are you supporting? What is the company selling or producing, or who are the patients that they take care of? Like, in order for your tech to be successful, you've got to understand the business that you're in. And I do think a lot of technology people, though, love their technology, and they just want to work on, coding what they're coding, or building what they're building, or, working on hardware, whatever it is that they want to do, or they like networking, or they like, data centers, and they kind of think, I like to do that part and I could do it anywhere for anything. And yes, you could, but you do want to know who you're doing it for today, and what they're using it for, and who it impacts at the end. I feel strongly that's important for technical people to know.
It's interesting you mentioned me mentioning that in previous episodes, and you're right. Once I started Teach the Geek, it forced me to think about where money comes from. But when I
Yeah.
was an employee, money ended up in my account every other week, and I wasn't even thinking about why or how. All I know is that it was there. Yes, we had to sell products, and the products that I was working on, the products that other engineers were working on, our sales team had to do a really good job of selling it
Yeah.
to to the hospitals. I worked in medical devices, but I never thought about how much of anything they had to sell. I just figured they do their job, I do my job, money ends up in my account. But again, it wasn't until I was not an employee anymore and I was self-employed that I had to figure out, well, how am I going to bring in money? Money doesn't just end up in your account.
Yeah. And that it might seem like, for a lot of technical people, I would say, I think they think, well, as long as I keep that server running, it like doesn't matter what's on the server. What matters is like I keep this server running. And I think it does matter what's on the server, right? Because what matters is it a system that like could go down and be down for 4 hours and it's no big deal? Or is this a system that like, if this goes down, like where's the high availability? We need to pop over because there's literally a patient, on a stretcher getting a surgery while this system is supposed to be up and running. Like you need to have an understanding of what apps are on that server, who are they supporting, what are people doing with those applications, how critical are they. It isn't just like keep my server up and running. I think, and it can be, but I actually think people would get more enjoyment out of their jobs if they had a better understanding of like where they fit in the ecosystem. Where is their technology fit in sort of running this company or running this hospital or running this business? I feel like you see how critical of a role you have if you have a better sense of sort of the overall picture of where that technology fits, because technology is running every company now, right? Like pretty every company is solely you know reliant on technology. People can't do anything without technology nowadays, really. I mean, hospitals at least can still take care of patients, but we do rely on technology quite a bit to take care of our patients. And we have to do it sometimes if the technology is not running. But For the most part, every company, every city and state, like everywhere you go, you need a technology department. So to me, it's important, you could go anywhere, but don't you want to go somewhere where you understand the critical nature of your position in the ecosystem that you're a part of?
Do you think that organizations should make technical communication between technical and non-technical people, trying to improve it as much as possible, a priority? And if so, what do you think an organization can do to make that happen?
Sure. I do think it's a priority. I do think that the leaders of the technical departments, like CIOs like myself, should work with our other vice presidents or senior vice presidents in operating departments to figure out like what's broken, like where are teams, not working well together, and fix it. Because it saves time and money, right? It saves resource time. If people are communicating well, work is going to happen faster. If they're not communicating well, it's going to take us twice as long to get everything done. So it's a business decision, really, to like have teams that communicate well together. I do think we offer some classes, like free classes on things like communications, verbal and written communications, delegation, like all those sort of soft skills. We also offer like project management and other change management. These are all classes that are free that anyone can take, but that help put your work in context. So project management 101, I think, is something everybody should take because it gives you that structure for how work happens or how work with other teams should happen, working together on creating that schedule, like what should happen first, second, third, who's assigned to do what. Having those skills gives you language to use in a conversation with a non-technical department as to, well, here are all the tasks that I have to do in order to build the thing I'm building for you. Now, where's your work and how do those two things fit in together? Can be a challenging conversation if you don't have the language and the tools and the conversational skills to have that discussion with another department. So I do think we try to offer classes on both sides. They're open to everybody that would help give structure to a conversation or to a project, that when you're going to have technical and non-technical people working together on a project, how do we give them some templates, some baseline tools to work with in order to have those good conversations? So that's something to think about, offering sort of both sides so that the work happens, faster. It will slow down, and especially in today's age, everything, it has to move faster than the way things used to be.
This has been a great conversation, Naomi. Thank you so much for being a
Sure.
guest. How can people get in touch with you?
Sure. Well, I'm on LinkedIn, Naomi Lenane. I work at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, and happy have people to connect with me there. And this has been a great conversation. It went by quickly, and hopefully your viewers and listeners find it helpful.
Excellent. Well, everyone, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Naomi.